Now, in this third class of course number 9, it's the I of grit. G-R-I-T, G-R-I-T, gut, resilience, and identity. I for identity. When we are recovering from abuse and trauma, some of us actually have lost our identity. We are more identified with the abuser and what they said about us than we are with our own sense of our own personality. We may also be more identified with the shock and the horror of the trauma we experienced and all that we had to do to recover and just survive the moment to even know who we are. We lose a sense of ourselves. Thirdly, we also lose a sense of ourselves in a good way, in that if we've been traumatized or abused, you may have gone through what's called a depersonalization or a dissociation or distanciation. And all of that is your ability to move literally outside yourself, whether it's astral projection, where you see yourself from above, or where it's just like you separating from yourself, which the shamans would say there was a soul loss, a part of you was lost in it. The idea is that you needed to disconnect from yourself in order to minimize the impact of the pain and trauma and horror, so that we try to neutralize it. We become amnesic. We lose that memory. So that can be a helpful tool of not really feeling something. I remember a long time ago when I was in college, a father had hypnotized a friend of mine to forget a trauma that had occurred to her when she was young. I never asked what the trauma was because she had amnesia about it, because her father had used hypnosis to create the amnesia. I thought that was such an interesting sort of thing, and it was before I was involved in psychology. But the benefit to it is that she's one of the happiest individuals, loving, kind, giving, creative, hilarious individuals, and she does attribute some of that to not having to deal with any sort of trauma or abuse. She doesn't remember anything. Her father and her mother won't tell her anything. I'm not going to ask. No one has to know. It's gone. It's there. She's free. And so that ability for her to be free is absolutely beautiful. And that is part of losing that part of yourself. Now, the thing is though, she has a really wonderful personality and identity for a myriad of other reasons. A great situation that was in great contrast to whatever that trauma was. If you have not had that great identity in your past before the abuse or trauma, you are going to have to create an identity of who you are. Now, you may be saying, I don't know who I am. I don't know who I am. And in that case, if you really don't know who you are, you might have an opportunity to say, well, who do I want to be? And that's a different creative question. There was a time in the 70s where there's a lot of people searching for, who am I want to know who I am. I'm in search of myself. And they'd go to all these different gurus and try to find themselves. But when we entered into the 90s and the early parts of the 2000s, people began to say, I'm going to create this. I'm going to be this. I'm going to be that. So there was a stark contrast between those who felt like they had to discover themselves and then be in accordance with what they discovered, and those people who decided to create themselves and be in accordance with what they wanted to create. I'm going to suggest to you that it's probably a combination of both, that we both discover aspects of ourselves and we also create aspects of it. Now, that creating capacity to create your identity, you get to ask yourself questions like, well, who do I want to be? Who do I want to emulate? What do I want to feel? What do I want to think? What do I want to occupy myself with? What do I want to create? So this, like, what do I want to be, is a very creative and dynamic thing. And that it's reliant on that sense of want. And that ability to want something may have been robbed from you by an abuse or a traumatic situation. I don't want anything. I don't want to want anything because it just hurts too much, because I have no power. It was taken away from me. I don't believe in it. I'm totally discouraged. I feel helpless to create what I want because someone else created what they wanted to and they robbed me of me. And that's a common reaction to losing your identity and someone else taking it. And that's one reason why we're talking about this in the chapter of the grit, because that grit requires you to say, darn, I will not let that person rob me of me. I will not let that person discourage me to the point of defeat. I will not be defeated. I will not surrender. I will thrive, and I will create, and I will transcend, and I will be me. And it's that determination, that's that G, the gut. And it helps you with bouncing back. But having an identity, if you don't know who you are, then maybe we need to do some work personally to help you go back and retrieve aspects of you that you had forgotten about, that kind of ran away, were obliterated, were lost in the presence of abuse and trauma. Secondly, we may also want to go into those abuse and trauma situations and find these amazing qualities that you were and you manifested during that time, but they got lost in the mix of the horror. They got lost in the debris of everything else falling apart. But we want to go back and find you. In the book that was written by Michelle, I think her last name's King, I do have it referenced in my book, she, in her recovery, was about finding herself. And one of the things that she does is she looks for compassion, heart, endurance, giving, laughter, and humor in a horrible, horrible 12-year ordeal of extreme abuse and trauma. Her story is horrifying and awful. And yet, she tries to lift out of that story every morsel of who she is that has so much worth and so much value. That's part of her identity. And then she tries to take all those parts of that identity that she so enjoys and manifests it in the course of a given day. Acts of kindness, acts of creativity, acts of sharing her story and helping someone, acts of laughter, acts of humor, so that she tries to manifest that identity, yell and shout her identity through her actions, what she provides, how she manifests herself. In addition, she discusses how she educates. So she's in the process, I'm going to educate myself to do this. I never knew that I could do this, so I found out that I could. Look at this. I didn't know I could do this. I can really do this. I can sing. I can write lyrics. I can write. I can make people laugh. I forgot that I could do that. And so it's just not only remembering, but also like creating these brand new sides that she had not created prior to the time or had totally forgot about in the 12 years of horrible abuse. See, this is all about finding your identity. One way of finding your identity is to help other people and see what inside of you feels good about that or where you are in that process. Another thing is to be really aware, be patient with yourself, be kind to yourself. Even if you don't even know who you are, to just know that one thing you want to do is to treat yourself with respect, to treat yourself with understanding and compassion, so that when you're in the state of utter confusion, you say, okay, I'm so confused, I'm so hurt, I'm so lost, but I will be kind to myself. And that very moment is both creative and discovery, because to be kind to yourself when you're totally confused, you don't know what you want, you don't even know what you can do or can't do, but you opt to be kind to yourself. That's you creating an identity associated to a quality that will help you become more resilient. Well, more can be said about you finding your identity, stepping into finding who you are and creating who you are. But that's the third letter of grit. So we have from the gut, the power, resilience, bouncing back, and having an identity of being you. So you have this identity now of being an abuse and trauma recovery person. You've been victimized. You escaped and you survived. And all of that's part of your identity. But there's so much more to you. And don't let the intensity and the eclipsing of the horrible things you went through stop you from trying to see everything else that's who you are. Next, also remember that if you were psychologically manipulated, if you were taken in and gaslighted, you may have been convinced by that person that you are an awful individual, that you are a loser, that you're worth nothing. And that is the power they exercised over you so they can keep you weak and victimized. That's just horrible that they did that to you. And now for you to go in there and unweave so that they said that I was that awful person. And then if you take that thread, they say I'm an awful person, you say, wait a minute, challenge it. Yell at it, scream, I am not an awful person. That is not my identity. I am not. And to be able to yell at the poisons and the lies and the horrible, condescending information that you were given is a way of you fighting for your identity's health. It's you being a hero to the you that was completely smothered by other people's cruel ideas that were designed to keep you powerless and not standing up for yourself. But remember, you escaped. Remember, you survived. And so for you to go and create or find the real threads of who you are, not letting yourself believe the lies of someone who twisted those lies in order to oppress you, to keep you weak. Those are hard to work through, but they're doable. Those are hard to yell and scream at, but that's what you do. You find the real you, and you do not let someone who was cruel be the person who defines who you are. Okay, the next is the T of grit.